Mark Sainer, Faye Grant, Jane Badler, Richard Hurd, and a whole host of others. The 1980 miniseries V and V: The Final Battle. I have actually been putting off doing a review of V for quite a while. I did do a review on V, the regular weekly series, which, well, you can go see that review there. I've put off reviewing V because of my love for V and how in-depth that story goes. Let me explain. I have a couple of folks that I follow on YouTube that I really enjoy their reviews and their critiques of various things culturally. I did just recently watch an analysis of the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which is like a 4-hour some movie, and the review lasted 2 hours because they analyzed it so closely. And I appreciated that. I enjoyed it. But it's not what I do here generally. But you could very easily, especially a miniseries, the 2 miniseries length over 5 installments of V and V: The Final Battle, go on forever. Suffice it to say, it was a cultural phenomenon. During that period of the 1980s, the Reagan years, there had been some changes made to how companies were allowed to market to minors, to children. And that is a major impetus behind why we got the media blitzes that we got for certain franchises. Star Wars was a movie, it got a comic book, and it had a fabulous toy line. G.I. Joe was a great cartoon, it got a comic book and a toy line. Always trying to give you an all-encompassing blitz of things you could watch, things you could read, things you could play with. Personally, I don't see the problem with that. Getting rid of laws and rules and regulations that restrict what the consumer wants in the marketplace. I mean, why wouldn't I want to have toys of the show that I'm watching, or a show of the toys that I love, or a comic book of the, why would you not give me these things all together to be like, you can buy vanilla ice cream on this day of the week, but then you can't have chocolate syrup until this time of the, that seems like an overreach of government authority. And also, why would you do that? Nevertheless, it was then the era in the 80s of these franchises: Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Star Trek became a big thing through its movie franchise. Didn't have as much toys for a long time, but it had comic books. V became a thing through television, which was odd because it was a live action TV science fiction show. It became a huge phenomenon just like that. People of all ages loved it. We never really got a toy line from it of any consumerability. We did get a comic book. I watched those shows. I read the comic book. I watched the TV series, as bad as it was, and it was really terrible by the end. But the miniseries captured the imagination of a whole chunk cross-section of people at the time. V and V: The Final Battle was like a perfect fusion of the science fiction alien invasion story and the totalitarian, the resistance of heroes against creeping totalitarianism story. There was very little effort put into disguising the fact that the aliens were Nazis. They were, although their costumes were overwhelmingly red, might be considered communist, their weird alien symbol looked like parts of a swastika cut out, and it was pretty obvious they were militant. They all had the uniforms, and everything about the story of the aliens coming to Earth. You had this alien invasion with a very thinly veiled reference to totalitarianism as we understood it in history. And you could understand that as the Nazi threat of World War II, or even the communist threat still ongoing in the Cold War, lies and propaganda, and the real heroes being in the minority and being oppressed and having to rise up, having to work as a resistance cell. It really fused together this idea of the alien invasion and this creeping totalitarianism in this perfect way that made it an appeal to the human spirit. I'm always saying one of the biggest problems they do with sci-fi now, or any sort of fiction, is this overwhelming focus on contemporary politics. Good Lord, when you're looking at the screen and yelling at us about who to vote for, you've made your franchise meaningless. You've made it so small instead of cosmic. You've made it so parochial instead of expansive that you've undermined it. Real quality stuff does always carry an ideology, but it projects it into the future in a way that has dignity and decency and class. This is what Star Trek used to do, and all of the fake Kurtzman Trek does not do now. It's what Star Wars used to do, but which none of the Disney Star Wars does now. It's what the Marvel comics used to do, and this is sort of this pattern. V was part of that earlier era, and they nailed it. They did this perfect assessment of totalitarianism versus the human spirit of freedom, the threat of alien invasion, the horror movie type of tie-in, because a lot of those alien invasion movies are also horror suspense because of the weirdness of the creatures, finding out that they're lizards and they literally want to eat us. It adds all of these different dimensions come into this story, and it does it so perfectly. And like Star Trek, like Star Wars to a lesser degree, but like the great franchises before it, it brought in everybody with this human spirit. One of the biggest things we hear about anymore is inclusion, 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 and this ridiculous story. And a lot of these writers, creators out of Hollywood, I swear it sounds so fake when they say it that I'm tempted to think they're making it up. When they come up with a story like, oh, well, my daughter said nobody in the video game looks like her, so I had to put women in World War II just to make it. What? What kind of terrible parent are you? You lost a teachable moment like that? If your child actually asked that, I question already your parenting. I question where they're going to school. I grew up with all of these franchises, these comics, these movies, these shows. I never once thought, well, there's nobody in there that's a quarter Chinese, so it doesn't include me. Gosh darn it. I guess I can't really be part of it. In the comic book, when Lieutenant Uhura became a commander, when Uhura actually got command of the ship, when they did a saucer separation in the comic book, that was one of the coolest things ever. It didn't even occur to me that Uhura happened to be black, that I couldn't enjoy that with her. Or Mr. Sulu became captain of the D'Artagnan during a stretch of the comic book, and how cool that was to see his character develop. I never once thought, well, he's Japanese and I'm quarter Chinese, so it has nothing to do with me. I don't know what kind of household you grow up in, what kind of culture you're exposed to. I don't know what people are telling you when you don't look at humans on the screen and familiarize in some way with those humans on the screen. When you've been taught such a narrow view of the universe that unless they look just like you, unless they want to have sex with the same people you do, you can't familiarize with them, empathize with them, learn from them. I think that's a bunch of hogwash. I think it's a bunch of made up communist crap that's been pushed on us long enough that people believe it because kids have been taught to look for these things. All men are created equal, which is man is in mankind as in humanity. It always included everybody until somebody decided it didn't, because that somebody was a leftist, not a rightist. It was a communist, not a traditionalist. Somebody, well, it says men, not women. It's not women spelled this way, so it doesn't include you. Don't you wish you were included? Guess what? You were included until people convinced you that you weren't. Boy, that's the sermon for the video. What V does, like all those great franchises, is it deals with the human spirit. And it even brings in all of that sort of, that political stuff that's become cliche now, but it did it in such a clever way that it was cool. Case in point, when the scientists are being oppressed, they've become the new Jews. blacklisted by the visitor occupation, allegedly because of a conspiracy to power, and they're hunting down the scientists. How do the scientists in our story, how do the Maxwells try to escape from the city? Their gardener, who happens to be Mexican, helps smuggle them because he knows how to smuggle people across the border. And there's this hilarious moment where he takes a bite out of the onion so that he can breathe on the border guards, so they don't want to talk to him as long. All of this brilliant little stuff. And it references the southern border thing that had already been going on for a long time. But none of it was preachy. In the moment of crisis, our scientist hero protagonists needed help, and the gardener helped them. And there's this sort of proud American moment in this weird way that this guy knows what he's got to do to get by the border guards, because and he ends up being this heroic character. He breaks out from the mothership with them. He helps fight the bad guys. The former Hood and his brother, who is a doctor. You get Elias and Dr., and I'm going to blank on his name, their father who works construction. You get this glimpse of the African-American community where you've got the father works construction. The mother has apparently passed away of the boys. He's got the two sons. One's a doctor. One's kind of a small-time hoodlum. So you got the hardworking blue-collar man, the guy that became white-collar. You've got the whole diverse spread of this experience within our culture through this one family, the one son going one way, one going the other. And it is actually the dad that gives us the great line when the aliens show up. At first we had to fight you honkies for a job, then it was the Mexicans. Now these guys, and they ain't even from this planet. Boy, that was probably going to tick off somebody that I tried to do the accent. But anyway, everything about V was this great moment. You've got medical students, doctors, construction workers, hoodlums, PhDs, anthropologists. You've got this cross, you end up by the final battle, you've got random women and children in the resistance doing the best that they can. You've got a priest, you name it, and they're all humans bound together by a single thread of their common humanity and their common resistance against tyranny. And what color they are, what background they come from, how much money they used to make before the tyranny drove them underground, none of that stuff matters anymore. And that's the real beauty of the story. A very realistic story, set in this science fiction setting. A realistic story of how people have dealt with invasions of their countries, with occupations by foreign powers, or occupations just by tyrannical governments and your yearning for your freedom. It's a timeless story about human beings and their struggle that could be in any century, past, present, or future, in any number of places. And they do it that way with that amount of tact and wisdom and intelligence, that they give you this enduring story, that you love these people and their struggle for freedom, and you want to see them beat the aliens, and you want to see Earth free. And that touching moment when they win at the end and the aliens are driven off, and they did it by pulling together, hanging together, using the different skills, getting together. It's incredible stuff. V was just an incredible story. And the regular weekly series did not. But you lost the culture of the lies, which the propaganda that most humans still believed looming over them was a major part of this story. When the visitors return and everybody who's not out of their mind knows that they're reptiles and they're the bad guys, it made the follow-up series really hard to pull off. They tried to make it more science fiction-y, and there's a lot of weird, but go watch my reviews on that. It was a sad failure, but it is, as I always say with these science fiction worlds, when you're building these universes, some of them have a limited life. And in V, you want the aliens to be defeated and humanity to live happily ever after. You've got to get there, and then there's nothing to do. Star Wars suffers this problem. It keeps recycling new versions of the old villainy, because ultimately, as great of a story as it is in a complex universe, you defeat the Empire and the galaxy is free and everybody's happy, and that's what you want. You want the ending to the story. Star Trek is sort of a perpetual thing, or could be, going out into space, meeting new people. Move it forward to the future, do it again. Keep moving it further, do it again. There's no reason for it to be as bad as it's become. But you run out of breathing room with some of these sci-fi universes. And with V, you needed to have the final victory to keep people. You needed that payoff. You needed it somewhere. But after that, you're sort of done. There's really not much to do after that. But V, as this standalone thing, as this 5-night miniseries, when you piece it together, wow, a phenomenal and incredible, enduring story that still holds up well and always would, and a perfect example of how to do all that sort of socio-political, historical commentary without being preachy and screaming at people, but giving them inspiration. People that of all races and genders and everything that you still empathize with, because they're human and because they're sharing symbolically in spirit their struggle and yearning for freedom. Anyway, that's V. Find it wherever you can find it. Buy it if you have to. I own a digital copy. I watch it at least once a year. Fabulous, amazing stuff still to this day. Peace and long life. The visitors are not our friends. They have come to rape our planet and kill us. They are not who they appear to be. Fight the inner earth lizards. Wait, did I say that out loud? And we'll see you next time.